G'day. Should every track have a Melbourne Walk? What is the Melbourne Walk? Well, it's an opportunity for the fans to get up close and personal with drivers, team principals and a whole lot of other players in Formula One. I'm going to answer that question in 8 seconds' time. Well, certainly the fans would say yes, they want a Melbourne Walk at every single race. Ever since Drive to Survive came on the scene and suddenly the whole world knows a whole lot more about the drivers, people want to meet them. And of course an F1 driver will gladly stop for one or two people, maybe not for 20, certainly not for 100, and forget being around a couple of thousand, unless there are some measures in place. And the measures that were in place at the Australian Grand Prix certainly seem to work. Essentially, let me tell you what the Melbourne Walk is. You've got a couple of thousand fans, you've got some very heavy-duty fencing, and then you've got a path where the drivers can walk from the car park to the paddock. There they walk past the fans, they stop for autographs, they stop for selfies, TV interviews them on the way in, we, photographers, photograph them on the way in, and then they head into the paddock and they go about their day's work. The reason that the Melbourne Walk works so well is because there is a level of security and the drivers feel safe. If I hark back to Bahrain earlier this year, on one day the drivers walked from the car park to the paddock and there were no security measures, which meant they were mobbed, surrounded, and of course a little bit scary for them, and they run the risk of offending fans because they can't then stop, they have to rush straight through. Thankfully, in the instance of Bahrain, they turned around and put up some fencing and that became a whole lot more safer for those drivers. What we're seeing in some paddocks, and I'll give you an example last year in Mexico, where suddenly drivers are surrounded, ganged up on. It's almost like a Beatles type hysteria. And it's not a good look, the drivers don't like it, and it's almost embarrassing for them. Let's go into detail about the Melbourne Walk. It's about 150 metres long. Essentially, it's just a track that runs from the car park to the paddock with some signage on it. There's a whole host of pitches on one side. There's a stage where there's lots of entertainment throughout the days, and it's great entertainment with DJs, dancers, roller skaters. There's a big screen there as well, and the atmosphere is fantastic. There's a lot of people waiting down the front, and at the back there's a couple of small high-riser stands where people can stand up and get some sort of glimpse. So how do you get to this particular spot? Well, you need to race in early in the morning. The gates opened at 8:30 a.m, and then you'd see this mad throng of people just rushing to get to the front row. The closest gate was gate 1. You could come from the other side of the track, but you certainly wouldn't be getting a front row seat because it was a longer journey. First into the track typically were mechanics, team principals, and then the drivers came. A lot of people say to me, when should I get there to meet a driver? Well, I can't tell you what time they get in. It depends on their particular plan for the day. On race day, it could be as early as 7 hours before the start of the race, up to about 3 hours before the start of the race. Some drivers park and then walk across the road, and hopefully for you, the spectator, they walk past you on the Melbourne Walk. But there is a separate path just to the side of it where, if they're sneaky enough, they can get in behind all the action and you won't even notice that they've walked into the track. Kevin Magnussen at this race on the first day drove his car right past all those people, parked up near the swipe gates and got out and headed into the paddock. That was only allowed once. In fact, it wasn't even allowed at all because he got told off for it. And how long does it take a driver to walk that walk? Could be anything up to 20 minutes, because often there'll be a couple of TV crews that want to interview the driver. Certainly they will stop for a lot of selfies and a lot of autographs, unless they're like a George, who on one day just pretty much went straight for it and stopped only for a couple of people. Lewis Hamilton did it on one day only, and that was on the Sunday, and he was pretty quick walking through there. Other drivers will spend as much time as they need to. Someone like a Daniel Ricciardo was always very giving of his time. Do they do this anywhere else on the F1 calendar? Yes, in Austria, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But let's talk about what actually goes on here. Those big cutout heads, how do you get them? Well, they were actually given out by the organiser. Early in the day, they were all lined up and then people were selected. And normally, pretty excited people who were going to have some fun with it. Drivers would also hand out things occasionally, like there were some signed pictures handed out. Caps were thrown into the audience, and that tends to cause a fair amount of excitement amongst the fans. And is it only for F1 drivers? No, the F2 and some of the F3 drivers also walked the walk, which gave I guess a lot of those fans an opportunity to see the up-and-coming drivers, and those young drivers tended to lap it up a little bit more because they don't tend to get that excitement at many races. So who gets noticed? Well, that's a tricky question because oftentimes with so many people there, law of averages says that most people aren't going to be attended to by a driver. So I can tell you one particular Chinese fan had a Chinese flag, and that obviously got Zhou's attention. One of Zhou's crew actually noticed him and went up and got his hat and got it signed and then delivered back to him. I remember Fernando Alonso seeing a fan who had a flag from his hometown where he was born. Now, of course, that instantly gets a driver's attention. One thing that got my attention, and subsequently Kevin Magnussen's, was this fan with this T-shirt who just shouted out, "Suck my balls, Kevin."
Once again, most unsportive driver of the
Suck
grid.
my balls, mate.
Yeah, you're really good, man.
Other things that will get you noticed, painted faces, yes, loud outfits, funny signs, and a lot of the TV people will certainly hone in on you if you stand out from the rest of the crowd. I find the whole atmosphere absolutely amazing. It's always good fun in Australia. I don't think it's ever got to a danger point. I know there was a bit of pushing and a lot of people were perhaps getting squashed up the front, but security seemed to sort that out. And on the way out of an evening, that's another time to grab the drivers because they tend to stay a little bit longer. There are fewer people waiting on the Melbourne Walk, and it's a bit more relaxed. I often see fans handing over presents to a driver who will look at them and thank them normally and then hand it off to one of their minders because they don't want to be carrying that all the way up. So that's a good idea. If you've got something interesting to present to a driver, you can do it at the Melbourne Walk. Oh, and by the way, how do you get there? Well, this particular spot is a little unusual because it's accessible by anyone with any ticket. Whereas if you want to go to, say, Austin and see the drivers as they walk into the paddock, unless you've got a paddock club pass, you won't get anywhere near those drivers. And of course, paddock club tickets are at the upper end, so this is not for the everyday fan. And that's why the Melbourne Walk and to a lesser degree the Austrian green carpet are so popular. Once all the drivers are in of a morning, the crowd tends to pretty much leave, go and watch the 2 practice sessions on a Friday, or on the Saturday they'll go for FP3 and quali, but after they'll come back and wait. Now, typically, those diehards will get back there straight after that second session and just stand there for a number of hours. But what times are the drivers likely to walk past? Well, if I take Friday, for example, in Australia, I think the second session finished at 5. Then the driver's briefing happens at 6:30, normally runs an hour. So the very earliest you'd see a driver on a Friday in Australia is 7:30 p.m. And that's the same around the world with a Friday schedule. On a Sunday night, you'll often see drivers leaving, but they can be in a hurry because they've got flights to catch. So you could be disappointed if you're waiting out there on a Sunday night. My question at the start of this video was, should every track have a Melbourne Walk? No. I'll tell you why. A, the drivers would tire of it because it's a big ask to do it every single day for 23 races. And remember too that they're doing fan appearances at some of these tracks, so that would mean they would have to greet fans closely at a equivalent Melbourne Walk around the world and then go and do another social commitment out there on a stage. There's also a cost for the promoter, and it's significant too with all that setup and, importantly, the security involved. Of course, some tracks like Japan, where the public is immensely polite and well ordered, you could get away with a few cones and perhaps some tape or sticks running between those cones. But if you go to a fan crazy event like, I don't know, Monza, forget it, you're going to need something way more substantial, and that costs the promoter money. What are the pluses of having an equivalent Melbourne Walk? Well, it's great for fans, and that certainly gets people in. A lot of people say to me, how do I meet a driver? Well, you're probably not going to meet a driver because if there's 10,000 people all wanting to meet a driver can't handle that level. So it's not going to happen. You have to be lucky, plan well, and know where to be at the right time so that there are not 50 or 100 people all clamouring for a driver's attention. And I see some appalling behaviour too from fans who perhaps are just caught up in the moment. I remember walking out on Sunday night after the Australian Grand Prix, some fans put his hand all over George's back and going for the selfie to make it appear like they are best mates. And of course, they're not best mates. It just tends to alienate you if you go and put your hands all over a driver. And I noticed George very quickly slapped his arm away, as he should have. And certainly that is what happens with Lewis Hamilton's bodyguard. He'll often slap people's hands when they try and touch him. So there's a tip for you. If you want to gain their respect, just have your phone out, Be ready, walk and take the shot. Talk to them, ask them a question. Otherwise, they just feel like pieces of meat. And before I finish, let's talk about Crown Casino. In Melbourne, a lot of the drivers used to stay there, but this year they decided to not stay there. Why? Because they were finding when they got back to the hotel, it was taking half an hour to get from the entry to the hotel up to their rooms because they had to stop for so many people. I remember one driver going back to the Ritz-Carlton in Budapest. He would actually drive downstairs into the car park and take the lift straight to his room, bypassing all those fans. And that's sad for them, but unfortunately when something gets so popular and there is very little security, that's what drivers will tend to do. And the other opportunity in Mexico last year and the year prior was a great thing where maybe 100 fans formed a line inside the hotel behind some barricading, and it was very orderly and the drivers would walk past and say hello and sign photos, and maybe it took them 5 minutes. So I think if a driver is asked, or if anyone's asked to spend a few minutes doing it, it's no big imposition. But if you're going to say every night you're going to have to spend half an hour appeasing fans, at some point the novelty and appeal of that is going to wear thin. So next time you're considering your best option of meeting a driver, you should definitely consider the Melbourne Walk. If you were across my social media on the Australian Grand Prix weekend, you would have seen I did quite a number of print signings with drivers. I did Esteban Ocon, there's still some of his available, along with Nico Hülkenberg. Yes, you can buy a Nico. Unfortunately, I've sold out of Fernando Alonso, Oscar Piastri, and get this, Toto Wolff in record time, the fastest ever. Took 30 hours for the 50 to go like that. So he is immensely popular. Which driver or team principal should I ask next? Interested to see your comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. How do you do it? Well, you put your finger on the screen like that. It's really simple. Also subscribe, because I noticed about 50% of you don't subscribe. You'll find all of my digital images at prostarpics.com. For my wall art, F1 photo books, those signed prints, along with some merchandise, head to my website, kimillman.com. And for my best images live from the track all during the week, go to Instagram and put in @KimIllman. You'll find me. Thanks for watching.
Stay passionate.